What is APY? In this program, we'll try to demystify what APY is. We'll answer, what does it mean? How do you calculate it? And why is it important? So first off, APY is an acronym for Annual Percentage Yield. It refers to the real rate of return you can expect from a deposit account. It considers the effect of compounding interest as well as how often interest is paid, and it produces a more accurate projection of returns. It shows how interest is added to the principal amount and progressively increases the rate of return. So, how do we calculate it? Now, this will be a little bit of a math lesson, but let's walk through it. Assuming in our example here, we have a 12-month CD, $10,000 balance, the interest rate, not the APY, but the interest rate is 5%. And in the first example, it will compound or pay interest one time a year. So it is important to remember that the number of times a year that we pay interest, that's also referred to as compounding. The formula, if you're into this, equals the beginning balance times the rate divided by 365, which are the number of days in a year. That gets you the per day interest earned. And then how many days in the period that you're paying interest times the number of days. So beginning balance times the rate divided by 365 days times the number of days in this period. So in our first example, we are compounding interest one time in a year. So if we walk through this example, $10,000 times 5% rate divided by 365 days times 365 days. Since we're only compounding that interest one time, we're paying it once in the year. That gets us to $500 interest earned. So at the end of the year, this account holder would have a balance of $10,500. So when we go look at the APY, since it only compounds one time, it pays interest one time, the APY is exactly equal to the rate because no interest is added to the principal except after the 1 year. So what happens if we pay interest semi-annually or 2 times a year? So we multiply 10,000 times the rate of 5% divided by 365 times 181 days. That's 6 months or half a year of days in this example. So during that first payment period, they will have earned $248 of interest. At 6 months, the balance would be $10,248 because we've paid them the interest. So now we're calculating interest on the second half of the year, the second interest payment. However, instead of $10,000 balance, our new balance is $10,248. Multiply that by 5% for 184, a few more days in the second half of the year, gives us an interest payment of $258. So the ending balance in the account is $10,506. That gives us an APY of 5.06%, slightly higher than the interest rate of 5%. So the APY is higher because we paid interest and then we calculated interest on the new balance, which was higher than the original balance. Let's take it a little bit further and let's say that it pays quarterly interest. Go through the same calculations. The first interest payment would be $123. Then it's 5% of $10,123, which would pay us $126 the second quarter. Have a new balance again of $10,249, get $129 in interest, and then the last quarter you'd earn $131. So the ending balance in the account would be $10,509, which gives us an APY of 5.09%. So in summary, if it's annual paid, the APY would be 5%. Semi-annual, the APY would be 5.06%. And quarterly, it would be 5.09%. So the more often you compound, the higher the APY will be when compared to the interest rate. So why is this important? It's very, very important. As a matter of fact, everyone knows that we are required to state the APY. We can talk about the rate, but we have to say the APY is X. And the reason this is so important is in this first example, if a client goes to bank X and says, what's your interest rate on a 12-month CD? And that bank says, we pay 5% interest for our 1-year CD, and they only compound 1%, then the APY is 5%. But let's just say that all they say is the rate is 5%. Then they come to our bank and we say, well, our rate is 5%, but it compounds quarterly. And so your APY is actually 5.09%. So for us to compare apples to apples, even though the interest rate was the same, because our bank compounded it more frequently, we had an APY of 5.09, whereas the competitor had an APY of 5%. So apples to apples, our rate is more attractive. That's especially important in an example like this, where the bank compounds one time and their rate is 5.05%. That sounds better than our 5%, but we compound it quarterly. So remember, if their rate is 5.05 but does not compound until it's paid at the end of the year, then the APY is 5.05. Even though our rate is slightly lower, the APY, because it's compounded quarterly, is higher than their rate. So that's why it's vitally important to know what the APY is